Hi, I'm Gene Chen, Yokogawa Stardom Product Manager. Today I'm going to show you how to set up the Modbus TCP server for your Stardom controller. There are two ways you can start a Modbus TCP project. One way is to go ahead and look at the sample programs that are provided on the DVD set for Stardom. So what you would do to utilize one of those is go ahead and do a File, Open project, and you would navigate up to your Yokogawa library and look for your sample programs. Inside the sample programs are a bunch of examples, and you want to look at example 11. Inside of example 11, you'll see that there's a C Modbus E and a C Modbus S. The Modbus S is for serial, and the Modbus E is for Ethernet. So you can go ahead and open up that sample library, or sample project rather, and it asks you if you want to unzip it, and you just go ahead and say no to select another folder, and we'll stick that in your projects folder. So once it's here, we say yes, save it. Now what this is going to do for you, it'll automatically have both a Modbus server and Modbus client set up within it. And it will also have the libraries loaded, both firmware and any firmware libraries or software libraries that are required to utilize the Modbus function block. So you can see the project came open. It's loaded now. It has a Modbus server POU and a Modbus client POU. If we open them up, you can see that the Modbus server is already set up. And if you look at the Modbus client, which I'll cover in a later vignette, I'll go ahead and show it to you now. It also shows a Modbus client is already set up. Let me load this up for you. You can say here's the initial client connection function block. Then these blocks below it are the function block examples of how to do a coil read, discrete read, holding register read, exception coil read, single coil, and single coil write, and a single holding register write. So you can do reads and writes from the client, and it also shows you the Modbus server. So that's simple. That's how you load the Modbus server and start utilizing it. Well, the next question then is, well, how do you populate the Modbus server with information that can be pulled by a client or a Modbus master? And you'll note here that there are some arrays that have already been set up. It's called coil, DISKI, IREG, and HREG. Of course, the coil array, it's a 10,000 element array of a coil, and it's of type SD, CMD, BSM, and this is a system data type that's already predefined. You don't have to define it. So you could name this something else if you wanted to. It's just in this project example, it already has it set up as coil. I actually like using them with these naming conventions because then you know what it is. It's an array of coils, an array of discretes, an array of input registers, an array of holding registers. The other thing that you will notice is that both PDD and OPC have been checked. So PDD is persistent data, and then OPC is also checked. This is how you're telling the system that this data is available to import and export through the Ethernet port. So if these aren't checked, then the data won't come through. So it's nice that this has already been set up for you. Other things to note are that you can input strings for a vendor. This one has Yokogawa in it. This is editable. You can make it anything that you want. You can edit that to be anything that you want. It could be a custom application name that you put in there, or your own company, or you can put in product here is Modbus. That would be your custom application name. The revision number can go in here. And then also something to note, this true flag, that means if this isn't on, then the Modbus server will shut down, will turn off, it won't communicate anymore. So you can programmatically set that to on, off, or just put a true flag there so it's always on. Okay, so then how do you get the information into the server? Well, simply you can put in myCoil. You can create a dummy variable called myCoil, and you can make that a Boolean. Since it's a coil, it means it's a digital input, digital output. And then you can simply write that into coil. So we'll just copy this onto your desktop here, go into that, and we'll say if we want to write to element 1, we say coil 1. And then now, when I wire this up, now whatever you store into my coil will get stored into the Modbus server register 1 for that coil. Likewise, you could do the same thing for discrete input register or holding register. So let's do a holding register here. If I pull this down, I'll edit this. If I put brackets, 1 end bracket, now whatever I store into this location, whatever value I put into this location, that will store into the holding register area 1. So if you're using Modicon Modbus convention, then that would be like the 40,000 register, be 40,001. With the new Yokogawa, the server doesn't use the 40,000 of the prefixes there. It just knows that it's element 1 of the array, element 2 of the array, element 3 of the array. And so you just write into the different elements as necessary. So you can go ahead and insert a variable and call it my real. I'll make this a real data value. And the interesting thing about the Modbus server, it doesn't support double word writes. So you have to do, if you have a real variable, which takes up 2 words, you have to split it into 2 words and write into consecutive registers. So we'll go ahead and show you how to do that now. So you already showed you how to set up a register 1. Now we'll set up holding register 2. Put that on there, and then you go to your little handy dandy wizard. And we can look for the proper function block that will allow us to split out the real into 2 separate words. And then we'll write the 2 separate words into one word into the holding register 1 and the second word in holding register 2. So the function is located in a slightly different library than one you might be used to using. Instead of being in the function blocks or functions library or type conversion library, so you can see the type conversions have all these different blocks to convert from word to any other type, Boolean, even real. So I'm using a real. So if I go down here, you can see I can convert from real to word or real to D word. But that's not what we want. We want to convert from real into 2 separate words. And so that's in a library called cutil. And if I open that up, you can now see that there are a handful of libraries in here that are very useful. And one of them is called R2W. That means it's converting a real into 2 words. So if I grab that and drag it into my POU page, you can see that I've got this nice function block here that I can now hook up my words to. So I can put the second holding register on outward 2, and I can put the first holding register to the output of outward 1, and then I can hook up my real number into it. And now we can go ahead and set the controller settings properly and compile the program. So what you want to do is go ahead and look at the configuration settings. I'm loading to an FCN RTU. So if you're loading to an FCN RTU, we need to change the configuration properties for the PLC processor to be show4_40. If you're going to download to an FCN or FCJ, then you can leave it as IPC40. So we'll select that, and once it's done, then we'll compile it. What happens is that you get a little pop-up and letting you know that you need to check your program to make sure that it's okay to run on this PLC type. And it is. There's a very simple program which just has a Modbus client, Modbus server, both of which are supported in both FCN and FCN RTU, in fact, and as well as the FCJ itself. So we can now go ahead and compile a program. Well, except for we need to make sure the address is correct also. Since we started this as a brand new program from a sample, we don't know what address they were using for that program. So we want to go down to the target settings here. and double click that, and then set this IP address to the IP address of your controller that you're communicating with. Just so happens I must have snuck that in there when you guys weren't looking. It's already at the correct address, so I'll say OK, and let's go ahead and compile. Once it's done compiling, you should have no errors, no warnings. Now we're ready to go ahead and load that to the controller. So we'll go ahead and click on the project control dialog, and then we'll go ahead and download the program to the controller. We'll do a full download, which means you'll have to stop the PLC. So go ahead and say yes, it'll automatically stop it for you and then try to load it. In my case, it tells me that I already got a program loaded into the controller. I'm about to load a new program by a different name. Is that okay? And I'm like, yeah, go ahead and overwrite it. Typically, when you're at a customer site, it shouldn't be a different program name, right? So it's quite appropriate for that warning to pop up. But since I'm in my lab, I can do that. Now it'll go ahead and load it, and then it'll come back and let me know when it's ready to run again. Do a cold start. And just say OK. Once the cold start's going, now we can go ahead and put this in debug mode. And then once we're in debug mode, I can go click on my reel, and then I can put a real value in there, like 10, 12, 0.5. Let's do that, 0.5. Say OK, overwrite that, and then we can see that it takes that value, splits it to 2 words, and puts that into the server register 1, holding register 1, and holding register 2. And right now it's showing it in hex values, but you can actually go into the dialog here, and you can debug dialog. That's what we want. I can change it to standard decimal values here, and you can see that the register 1 will have 8192, and register 2 will have 17533, and you combine those together, and that forms the full double word for a real value. Likewise, we can also change the flag on the coil, overwrite that to true, and now we'll write that into the Modbus server. So now a client connecting to this server will see those changes. Now this concludes the Modbus server setup from the sample program. If you didn't have the sample programs downloaded, then there's another way you could do it. The other way to do it is a little bit more onerous. What you do is you do a open new project, and then you want to use the InPass or Stardom FCX template. I like using the InPass because InPass typically means you're going to do some kind of process automation controls. If there's no automation and it's strictly just passing data, you can do Stardom FCX. But let's go ahead and use Stardom InPass template. You'll load it, and then once it's loaded, we can go ahead and make the change to the processor. If you're using FC and RTU, then you'll want to go ahead and use the show 440. Otherwise, you can just leave this alone. Once again, I get the message saying that warning me that I'm changing processor types. I already know that, and so there's no issue there. There's no program loaded in the default except for this counter, simply adding 1 to a counter variable and just counting up. So it's just a dummy task that you can put in there, that's automatically put in there for you. So what you want to do then is you now need to go into the help files here, and you want to look at Modbus communications. And then within the Modbus communications, went over this in the basics setup procedure, but I'm going to cover it again here in case you didn't look at the Logic Designer basic setup. So when you click on the procedure for using this library topic under the Modbus help, then you'll get this description for using the Modbus library, and it gives you one for the serial communication as well as one for the Ethernet communication. And it tells you which libraries you need. It says for Ethernet library you need to install this firmware library. So this is the firmware library you need to install. And you'll need to install 3 end-user software libraries. So it's their SD Modbus E, the SD CUDL. You'll recall that I pointed the SD CUDL library out before. That's where you were able to split a real word into 2 words. And then if you're going to use Modbus TCP server, then you also need to load the Modbus S library. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we go here to the libraries and we check to see if it's already in there or not. And we see that it is not here. So we need to right click, insert firmware library, and then we're going to look for that FCX PLCE, and here it is. It's inside of here. We choose the firmware library, and it loads. And then as you see, it pops up. As soon as it's done loading, it now shows up in the library list. So let's go ahead and add the 3 software libraries that are required. We need to insert the software user libraries, and that was the Modbus E was one of them. So we'll go ahead and load that now. Alright, for this user libraries, you may recall from the setup, you don't look at the folders, you look at the name. So you look at the name of the MWT file. So we're going to go ahead and load the SD Modbus E library. And when it's done loading, it too will show up in this library list. So you can see that it did indeed show up. And we'll add the next library, which is the Modbus S list library. So once again, right click, insert, user library, ignore the folders, look for the MWT file, Modbus S, it's right here. Then we'll load that one. Once that shows up in your library, you can load the last user library, which is the CD CUDL. So we'll go ahead and insert user library again. And for the SDC UDL, there it is. And then once that is in there, we can then look for the Modbus server function block and load that into the main POU and set it up. Okay, now that it shows up in there, we can now go ahead and open up the library wizard. You can see now in the library wizard you have these new libraries that weren't there before. It's the Modbus E, Modbus S, and the CUDL. And since we know we want to use the Ethernet or Modbus TCP library because we want to set up the Modbus TCP server, so we select the Modbus E library, and then we look for this BC open and BS open. So the BC open is the client, and that would be the Modbus client. In this case, we want to select the Modbus server. So Modbus server open, pop that in here. And you can see it's the same function block as we saw in the example. Only this time it's not populated for me. I have to go ahead and type in these parameters by hand. So as I told you before, this has to be true or the server won't run at all. We want to set up the timeout delay variable. And once you look at the help, it tells you the parameters. What are the ranges for those delays? So the timeout range is 5 to 30 seconds. The delay range is 20 to 500 milliseconds. So I'll just go ahead and use, it's probably safe to go ahead and start with the lowest number, and then if you have problems you can increase the delays there. So we'll use 5 seconds and 20 milliseconds. So we'll just go ahead and let it be a variable. So we'll say my timeout, and you can, that way you can continue to change that after you've compiled the program without having to go back in and recompile. In other words, you can change it in debug mode. Whoops, except for I named it same thing twice. This should be my delay. Alright. You can skip these are optional. The vendor product revision option, you can leave them blank, but you just have to put in an array for one of these. If you don't have any coils, discretes, or input registers, then you can skip those and just put in the holding register. But if you have or if you're using each of these data types, you need to put the array in of each of these data types. So we'll go ahead and call that coil. What's nice is when you double click on the input here, it automatically finds the correct data type, and it's already defined in the database there, or in the system database. So you just have to type in a new name, and it automatically puts it in the input and the output. So hreg, oops, made a mistake, should have been holding reg, so let's delete that and try it again. This will be ireg, and the last one is hreg, and that already existed. There we go. And then what we need to do is make sure that we select both PDD and OPC on all these arrays. If you don't do that, then it's a common mistake people will make. If you don't select these two boxes, no data will come through the server. And you'll be scratching your head figuring out, why won't this thing communicate? So go ahead and select those. And then here's the error status for the block. And then here's the communication error code for the block in case there's a problem. This just helps you in troubleshooting. This is the status for the block. So I call it MB server status. And let's go ahead. Check that. And error. Underscore error. And then what you can do here is on valid, this is the Modbus server valid. That way you can tie in any function blocks. Use this as a trigger. That way if the Modbus server is not valid, you don't have to run a bunch of code that's not is going to be running useless anyway. Okay, so now we're pretty much done, and you can then go ahead and go ahead and check both of these. And then go ahead and, just like we did before, set up a my coil. It's a Boolean type. And then we can take this coil array, drag it out, and then pick any kind of element you want. I did 1 before, but we can make it 100. You know, it's whatever element you're going to communicate with. And you just wire it up, and then that's that simple. That's it. You're done. Well, you compile it, and then you're done. Well, compile it, load it to the controller, then it's ready. Now, one of the other things you have to keep in mind is, what is the address that's used for the client? What does the client use to connect to the server? The server has to be set up with the IP address of your controller. And then the error I got here was no target setting. I didn't give the IP address of my controller, so we need to do that here. It's 192.168.1.110. You may recall from before when I set this up using the sample program. So now that I've entered that, I should go recompile, and it should be one happy camper. Yes, no errors, no warnings. It's now ready to load to the controller, so we can do a download. Do a full download, and then it's ready to use. Okay, so this concludes the tutorial for setting up the Modbus server, Modbus TCP server, with your Stardom controller. Join me next time, and I'll show you how to set up the client.